So in addition to handling litigation, we here at Texas Probate Attorney also handle a lot of just regular estates, whether it's probating a will or doing an independent administration, or sometimes doing a dependent administration, which we're going to talk about today. Sonia does a lot of the background work. Sonia's my paralegal. She's been my paralegal for a while, and she's also been handling specifically probate and estate matters for over 20 years. And so she's really, my right hand in getting these things sort of up and running, and then and we've worked very well together. So we're just going to kind of go through a case that we've handled that was somewhat difficult to explain all the different things that can kind of happen. I think it's interesting. We seem to get most of the ones that are messed up after other people have messed them up. I mean, that seems pretty accurate. So in this one we had, and we're using fake names so that we don't, impugn anybody. But Jack Smith died on January 1st of 2022, and he had no will, but he had 3 children, and his wife had previously passed away. And so he had one adult son, John, who died, leaving 2 grandchildren, and then James, who was an adult son, and then Jackie, who was an adult daughter of his. He never took care of her, never paid child support, but the family knew that she was his child, and incidentally, she's not on the birth certificate. So, there are things that we're going to have to do to establish her as his heir. So, kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yes, so we will have to do an dependent administration and do an heirship to determine who the heirs are. And since Mr. Smith was not on Jackie's birth certificate, we will have to do DNA testing of the siblings to determine if she's an heir, and that's going to hold us up to getting it started possibly. We can get a dependent administrator appointed, but we still have to complete the heirship before any distributions can be made. So we will have to do DNA testing to determine if she is the child of Mr. Smith.
And so in normal circumstances, we would hope that the person had a will, but if they didn't have a will, then we do an independent. But that requires consent of all the heirs. And the difficulty here is that 2 of the grandchildren, who are the sons of the predeceased son, one of them is 5 years old. So we can't do an independent for that 5-year-old, right?
Correct. And Jackie's not in agreement until she determines
that she's a spouse or a child,
Yeah.
right?
She's not in agreement for an independent at this point.
And so as far as the assets we're looking for, we looked at in this estate, there was a bank account that was not beneficiary designated, worth $200,000. There's a brokerage account at Fidelity with $1 million, also not beneficiary designated. And explain really quick before I go on, why is it important to determine whether or not the accounts are beneficiary designated or not?
If they're beneficiary designated, they're not probate assets. They go outside of the estate and they go directly to the beneficiary named on the accounts. And
so it's part of a probate estate for tax purposes, but for the purposes of an in-state probate proceeding, those assets will not count toward the inventory or toward distributions, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And they won't be under court jurisdiction.
Okay.
If it's independent or dependent.
And so Jack Smith also had a house that was community property. It was purchased during their marriage and it was paid off. They have 2 cars, a lawsuit for wrongful death, and there's a law firm that had been hired prior to Mr. Smith's death. There's 10 unsecured creditors, and there's some unclaimed property in the state comptroller. We also determined that taxes had not been filed in 4 years, and so we have to deal with that too. So kind of talk about what our process is once, and all that information that we have, we got from them filling out an intake form, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so what is so once they've filled that out, signed up, retained us, under this fact scenario, what's sort of the first thing that we do?
So we would first do an application for dependent administration since the daughter is not in agreement for an independent. We can file the heirship at that time so we can get the ball rolling to get the ad litem appointed and to start the DNA testing. But we do have to get a dependent administration on file. We have to give notice to all of the heirs before we can set it for hearing. Of course, the clerk's office is going to have their citation by posting, so we have to wait for stuff like that to proceed. It's usually 30 to 45 days before we can get a hearing on a dependent administration. And that's if we can, secure notice to everybody.
Okay.
To all the heirs.
And the significant thing that you mentioned in the beginning was that, or you may not have mentioned this, but there's an attorney ad litem, and that person's job basically is once we've given them the list of heirs, then we also have to provide them with names of disinterested witnesses and then whatever other documentation they request.
Correct.
And they're basically the judge's private investigator and makes a determination based on what we give them of who the heirs are.
Correct.
And
the heirs that we listed in our heirship are the only heirs, and nobody's left out.
Right. And we've had scenarios before where, 3 kids get together, they have a 4th sibling, they don't like them, and so they try to act like they don't exist, and
Right.
that stuff always comes out of the woodwork at some point.
Yep.
And so, okay, so we filed the application. What's the next sort of thing that we need to do?
So after we secure notice, we can have the hearing for the dependent administration. Of course, the heirship is going to take a little time, so we're not going to have that at the same time. But we do need to get someone appointed to collect assets and deal with estate business. So once we have the hearing and they're appointed, there will be a surety bond. We'll secure the surety bond for them, get it executed, get it approved by the court, and get their letters of administration. The house is vacant. It's paid off, but it's still in the wife's name. So we will have to do an affidavit of heirship. She didn't have a will either to pass the house, her portion of the house, to her husband. And then we will do an application to sell real property. We'll do an application to appoint an appraiser because the court has to appoint an appraiser to appraise the property to make sure that we're getting fair market value. An application to sell the personal property along with the inventory. We have to tell the court what's in the estate and all the personal property, the real property, the bank accounts, the investments accounts, and we have to tell them that. So they know what's in the estate, and then they'll appoint their appraiser, and that'll be our first step to really getting things moving along to start liquidating some of the assets.
Okay. And something you mentioned in the beginning, or that we talked about, was that in addition to the other assets, the car and the house, there's also a pending personal injury lawsuit where I believe Mr. Smith hired this gentleman to pursue a wrongful death case on behalf of his wife. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so we have to, in this case, because the lawyer was retained prior to his death, all we need to do is get the contract ratified, not approved.
Correct.
But if no one had been hired, if for instance, the claim was for Mr. Smith who passed away, then whoever the administrator was would need to go hire a lawyer, a PI lawyer, to represent the estate, and we'd have to get approval rather than ratification, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And so we do that, we do the inventory, but before we can file any of these things where we're asking permission to sell or whatever else, the inventory has to be filed, correct?
Yes, it has to be approved by the court.
Okay. And so walk us through the rest of sort of the disposition of at least the real property and the vehicles. Like, how does that happen?
So once we do the affidavit of heirship for Mr. Smith's wife, that will pass her portion of the property to him 100% because the children were of the marriage. It depends on the determination of the heirship from the child that's alleged. But then we will coordinate with a realtor, with the client to help them get the property listed. They will take the cars to CarMax and get a quote. If they want to sell it to them, they're welcome to sell it to them. Then we will have to in this case, we'll have to retain a CPA. We have to do an application to retain a CPA to do the tax returns and to try to mitigate some of the penalties and interest in the estate because he hasn't filed for a long time.
All right.
So we will have to do that. And of course, we have to claim the unclaimed money funds from the state comptroller because it's about $25,000. So there's significant money there. So that's a little bit of a process too. But
Okay. And so we do those things. We get the PI lawyer retained. They start doing their job. Once we've liquidated the vehicles and the house and claimed the unclaimed property, then hopefully by that point we've had the DNA testing done and we've gotten some resolution with regard to this sister, whether or not she's an heir, and then we can go ahead and get the heirship completed.
Yes, we can. But this estate does have personal property like paintings and a gun collection that we have to get appraised to. So we have to get the court to appoint an appraiser for that as well.
Okay. And so once all those things have happened, everything's been sold, then we're just sort of in waiting mode to determine what happens with the PI lawsuit.
Correct.
And then once that happens, then what do we do?
So if it takes longer than a year, of course, we have to file an annual account. We have to file an accounting every 12 months on the anniversary date of their qualification of being appointed. If we're longer than a year, when it comes time, then we will do the final account. Final account tells the court everything that's happened with the assets, if they've been sold, what they were sold for, and how much is left in the estate, and the distributions are, pursuant to the heirship.
Okay. And then we also have to get the settlement approved, assuming there is one in the PI case.
Correct.
And so, this has been sort of a short taste of all, many of the problems that we encounter, but this is something that you and I have been doing together for a while, but even separately for over 20 years, both of us. And you're the one usually gets on the phone with the client and helps walk through with them all the different steps. But the most important thing about us doing this today is, one, to let people know that we do litigation and have been very successful at it. And I believe that there was a video done by Stacey Kelly sort of talking about the litigation. But Sony and I also handle regular estate cases. And really, when that happens, she's sort of the point of contact for the clients to get receipts and things gathered together for inventories and for accountings, and also putting everything together for the heirship. And so, if you call us and hire us to help you, no matter what it is, we can do it. And we have an entire team. Sonia's the head of all the rest of the folks that work for the firm to coordinate hearings being set, documents being drafted, things being filed, appearances being made, and ensuring that we gather everything together so that the court knows what's going on, and we can get these cases opened and closed as fast as possible.
Right.
Okay. So, I think that's the good primer on how we deal with just estates. Obviously, in some instances, hopefully where there's a will or where there's some agreement and everybody meets the requirements for an independent administration, we'll be able to do that, which is less expensive and less time consuming. But when things are difficult, most often we have to do a dependent, and that does take time. We have some that have been open for years and years and years because the lawsuit still hasn't settled entirely. But we are there, willing, able to help people in these circumstances. So, as we always say, you can get on the internet, you can call the number and schedule a call with us so that we can help you through this process as well.